Have you ever stopped to notice how, all of a sudden, it seems like everyone around you has an autism diagnosis, or knows someone who does? Some people say this never used to be so common, or medicine just overdoes it these days. What if I told you that those people are at the same time both right and completely wrong? The number of diagnoses really has grown, and in a quite remarkable way. But the explanation behind it will genuinely surprise you. Autism didn't appear out of nowhere. It isn't a modern epidemic. It isn't caused by vaccines, diet, or screen time, and it most certainly isn't a trend. What changed quietly and rather revolutionarily was our ability to see. For decades, people who lived within the spectrum, what we now call ASD, autism spectrum disorder, were labeled as eccentric, difficult, lazy, or more simply, a bit odd. They suffered in silence, without a name for what they experienced, without support, without direction. Today, thanks to a genuine leap forward in our scientific understanding of neurodevelopment, these people finally have access to what they always needed: early identification, understanding, and proper care. In this video, you're going to understand the 3 concrete reasons that explain the rise in diagnoses, and why this is, in fact, one of the best pieces of new science has ever given us. Ready to look at this differently? If you've ever heard someone say that autism has become fashionable, or that it seems like everyone's got it these days, know that this impression makes complete sense, but it conceals a far more interesting explanation than it might first appear. The rise in autism diagnoses is not a sign of some silent epidemic, nor is it an exaggeration on the part of modern medicine. It is, in truth, a reflection of something science spent decades building: genuine knowledge about human neurodevelopment. Think about it this way. Imagine you've always existed, but nobody knew your name. Then, suddenly, someone names you, describes you, understands you. You didn't come from nowhere. You simply started to be seen. That is precisely what happened with the spectrum. More diagnoses don't mean more autism in the world. They mean that people who were previously suffering in silence, without any understanding of why, now have access to a name, an explanation, and, most importantly, the right support. Reason 1. The diagnostic criteria expanded significantly. Up until the 1980s and 90s, a diagnosis of autism was reserved for the most severe cases. Children with almost no spoken language, very intense behaviors, and difficulties that were evident from the very first months of life. If you didn't fit that narrow profile, you simply didn't qualify. It was like trying to pass through an incredibly narrow doorway. Only those who could barely move through it made it to the other side. The diagnostic criteria of the time worked in exactly this way, a funnel that left the vast majority of people behind. As science advanced, that funnel was gradually replaced by something far broader and more precise. What was once referred to as Asperger's syndrome or other neurodevelopmental conditions came to be recognized as part of the same spectrum, with 3 levels of support that account for entirely different profiles. Yet this didn't create new people. It revealed those who had always been there, waiting for an early identification that had never come. Reason 2. We've learned to recognize signs that were once completely overlooked. How many people do you know who have always been described as different, away with the fairies, far too sensitive, or stubborn for no good reason? For decades, difficulties with social reciprocity, very intense interests in specific subjects, and an unusually heightened sensory sensitivity were treated as bad behavior, poor upbringing, or simple eccentricity. Nobody imagined that these signs might be part of something far deeper and far more understandable, rooted in how a person's brain develops. The problem is that ignoring these signs came at a considerable cost. Children and adults living within the spectrum without any diagnosis would spend years trying to fit into a world that simply didn't understand how they functioned, accumulating anxiety, frustration, and a persistent sense of not belonging. Growing awareness of these signs changed all of that. Today, an intense fascination with trains, a genuine difficulty with eye contact, or a strong reaction to loud noises are no longer dismissed. They are starting points for an early identification that can transform the entire trajectory of a person's life. Reason 3. The tools we use to identify autism became far more sophisticated. Imagine that for years, an entire town fished using a funnel instead of a net. everything that didn't fit through the narrow opening simply slipped away. Not because it didn't exist, but because the instrument wasn't capable of catching it. That is precisely how the autism diagnostic process worked for a very long time. Only the most obvious cases were identified, while the majority of people within the spectrum continued through life without any support, without any explanation. The problem was never a lack of cases. It was a lack of adequate tools. Today, the diagnostic process functions like a wide, carefully constructed net, capable of identifying all 3 support levels with far greater precision. This means that someone with level 1 autism, who might never have been recognized decades ago, now receives guidance, strategies, and a real understanding of their own neurodevelopment. The net didn't fill the sea with new fish. It simply stopped letting so many slip through. And understanding that distinction is what separates unnecessary panic from an honest reading of what today's diagnostic criteria actually represent. Knowing that the rise in diagnoses has a scientific explanation is liberating. But knowledge only completes its cycle when it becomes action. The first practical step is simple, but powerful. Stop labeling and start supporting with concrete strategies. Instead of saying, "He's just difficult," ask, "What does he need in order to thrive?" That shift in thinking completely changes the way families, teachers, and carers relate to people within the spectrum. And it reduces the anxiety of everyone involved. One of the most accessible and effective tools for anyone living alongside someone on the spectrum is the visual schedule. A simple board with pictures or icons showing the sequence of the day can dramatically reduce anxiety and daily conflict because it transforms the unpredictable into something understandable. And when it comes to seeking further information, go straight to the scientific sources. Books such as Neurotribes by Steve Silberman are safe harbors in a sea full of miraculous promises that deliver nothing but frustration. We've come a long way together. And now you know, there isn't more autism in the world than there was before. There is more knowledge, more awareness, and at last, more people receiving the support they always deserved. The diagnostic criteria evolved, signs that were once ignored are now recognized, and what was once a narrow funnel has become a net broad enough to embrace the true diversity of the spectrum. And this is not a reason for alarm. It is a reason for relief. But now comes the most important part. What are you going to do with all of this? If there's a child in your life whose behavior has always seemed difficult to explain, this is the moment to seek a proper assessment with qualified professionals. If you live alongside someone who has already been diagnosed, why not revisit your approach and try introducing a visual schedule this week? And if you recognized yourself somewhere in this video, that deserves attention and care too, without any judgment whatsoever. The knowledge about neurodevelopment that has reached you today has the power to change lives, but only if it steps off the screen and into real life. Early identification saves years of unnecessary suffering. Awareness transforms families. And a single piece of the right information at the right moment can be the turning point in the story of someone you love. If this video resonated with you, imagine what the next ones might do. Subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, and come back for every new video, because here, real knowledge arrives every week. No miraculous promises, no scaremongering, just clarity and science in the service of those who need it most.